and recognize this is dangerous. So don't just cross your fingers, but have a plan. Don't just go, I hope this goes okay, but instead say, I may well die next Thursday. So let's have a plan. And I actually had my wife come in to one of the sims that we run, the big management sims where I died on orbit, because it's a measurable probability. How is everybody going to react? How will the technical people and the medical people and the public relations people, and how many minutes will it be before the Houston Chronicle is sitting on my lawn, or how soon will it break on social media, and how should my wife get ready for it, and what sort of life insurance? And I'm a Canadian, so how much longer will she live in the States? Where will she move back to in Canada? Let's just go through all that. It's probably not going to happen. But by going through it and thinking about it and having a plan, it's actually calming.
What's doing, everybody? I'm Alec Lace. Thank you for watching First Class Fatherhood. Today's guest on the podcast is Commander Chris Hadfield. Chris Hadfield is a Canadian astronaut and former fighter pilot. He's also an author of a new book out right now titled The Apollo Murders. He has flown in space 3 times. He was the commander of the International Space Station. It's a huge honor to have him on the podcast today. So get down there, smack the subscribe button, tap the like, and let's jump into it right now with Chris Hadfield on First Class Fatherhood. Joining me now, First Class Father, Chris Hadfield. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Hey, from one father to another. Thank you very much. Glad to be on.
All right, let's start it right there. How many kids do you have? How old are they?
I have 3. My wife and I have 3. My wife and I met in high school, and we had kids fairly young. So our kids now are 38, 36, and 35.
Wow, very cool. My oldest is 15. I have 4 myself, so I'm halfway there to where you are. I'm in no hurry to speed up to you there. So
You're right. You're right in the thick of all the confusion and contrarian demands and adolescence and puberty and all of that. So I salute you for where you are in life as a father right now.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. If you could, Chris, please just hit my listeners here with a little bit about your background and what you do.
My name's Chris Hadfield. I was a downhill ski racer in my teens and early 20s. I joined the military. I went to 4 different universities, and I became a fighter pilot in the Cold War. And I was a combat fighter pilot. And then I went to test pilot school and was a test pilot with the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy, even though I'm Canadian. And then I was selected as an astronaut, and I flew in space 3 times. I commanded the International Space Station. I was NASA's director in Russia, director of operations in Russia. I retired from government service after 35 years, about 8 years ago. Since then, I've written 4 books, all of which have been bestsellers. My new one just came out, The Apollo Murders, a brand new thriller fiction book, which is doing fantastically well. And then I work with a lot of space companies and technology incubators, and I play a lot of music. And my wife and I are just coming up on our 40th wedding anniversary, which is inconceivable to me. And I'm a very lucky and fortunate and grateful human being.
Wow, well, what an incredible journey you've had here, and great stuff. Yeah, and I have a copy as well.
Oh, look at that.
Murders here. So
cool.
I'm going to hit on that in just a minute here. So take me back, if you could, Chris. Obviously, a very long, extensive career, been to space the whole bit. But take me back to the beginning of your fatherhood journey now. About how old were you when you first became a dad, and how did becoming a father kind of change your perspective on life?
In the Canadian Air Force, we don't have very many bases. And especially as a fighter pilot, you get posted to sort of the hinterland of Canada. And my wife had already graduated university, had a promising career as a computer programmer, but then they were going to post us to Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and then Cold Lake, Alberta, and then Chicoutimi in northern Quebec. And you can almost tell from the names that none of those places, were hotbeds of computer programming for my wife to be able to get further advancement. And so we kind of thought about it. We were just in our early 20s, and we thought, well, we eventually want to have kids. Let's have our kids now while we're living in these remote military bases. And then when we eventually get posted back to a larger population center, then hopefully the kids will be of kindergarten age, and it'll free my wife up then to be able to get back into the workforce. And amazingly enough, that happened. We had one child while I was posted at Moose Jaw. One was born in Cold Lake. One was born in Chicoutimi, Quebec. And then we started getting posted to other places. And Helena, my wife, got back into the workforce. So who knew? And I think we had 3 kids essentially by the time we were 25, way before we were ready to have 3 kids. But we had lots of energy then, so there's never any real rule book, and there is no control sample to see how you would have done if you'd done everything differently. What it would have been like if we'd waited till our 40s to have kids. There's no way to ever know. You just kind of got to go with your gut and then do the absolute best that you can.
Yeah, very well said, Chris. And what would you consider to be the top values that you had hoped to instill in your 3 kids as they were growing up?
I wanted them to have a voice in their head that would be there when my wife and I weren't around. Sort of an intrinsic value system of right and wrong, of what to do, of how to behave. And so we tried to set a good example. We tried, be good citizens, contribute to the community that has nurtured you, and be respectful of other people, but most importantly, be respectful of yourself, and always try and make the most of yourself. You have been given this great gift of being born into this time and place with an enormous legacy before you of people who have worked so hard to hand you health and long life and opportunity and education. So, think about that and sort of the societal responsibility that comes along with that, and have fun. Take the time out to enjoy what's going on. And I would say, one of my thoughts, one night I turned to my wife and said, you know what parenthood really is? It is the good intentions of the morning sacrificed on the altar of reality every single day. But the beauty of it is you get another morning the next morning to try and do better as a parent the next day. And so those were our attempts to give goals to our kids. And to a very large extent, I think we succeeded.
Yeah, very well said. I love that, Chris. And obviously, I think being an astronaut's got to be the coolest dad job there is. So, well, also, I think what comes with that, too, could be the pressure, especially for, a young man or a young woman that's looking to, I know we always, as kids, want to impress our dad. We always look for that approval. Did you ever have any of that or sense any of that from your kids growing up? Was there any pressure on them to kind of live up to the mold? Dad is an astronaut, anything like that? How'd you kind of handle all that?
It's been a huge factor for all 3 of my children, Alec. And it started rearing its head at quite an early age. And one of the times I remember early on, I was taking my 12-year-old son, or 13, just all still very self-conscious and unaware of how to behave socially and all that. And we had the task of going to, I forget, Kmart or something to buy underwear. And we're standing in the 12-year-old boy underwear bin, and someone comes up to me and says, "Are you Chris Hadfield, the astronaut?" and wanted to get my autograph. And my son, it's embarrassing enough buying underwear with your dad, the little tighty whities. But now, to have this going on and his dad being lauded while he's going through the kind of miserable process of just getting comfortable with himself. And my kids chose 3 different paths. One, he moved to China right after he finished college, basically so that he could succeed or fail on his own merits, where people wouldn't recognize my name and then immediately assume that because my last name of Hadfield isn't very common. My second son decided to support us directly and actually get involved in our business, and was hugely helpful in my 3rd space flight. He was the one who suggested I make a recording of David Bowie's Space Oddity, and was, turned that into a very successful public flights. So I thank my second son for that. And our daughter decided just to do everything of her own merits, to be respectful of us, but never ask for anything. And she's now a professor of psychology in Dublin at Trinity. So all 3 of them have taken different paths. All 3 of them have done fine. But it was definitely a burden, because if you're the child of a famous and sort of celebrated person, not just a celebrity, but actually someone who's celebrated for their accomplishment, not just their fame, then if you succeed, then people say, well, of course you succeeded. Your dad's an astronaut. And if you fail, people say, well, why did you fail? Your dad's an astronaut. And you can never actually just sort of be yourself. And all 3 of them have had to deal with that. And my wife and I have done what we could to help them with the reality of being a well-known astronaut's child.
Yeah, I would only imagine it's difficult, Chris. I bring a lot of real heavy hitters on this podcast here, and a lot of guys that started from humble beginnings and then became, through their own work and effort, famous or wealthy or whatever have you. Now their kids are coming from a different scenario where they're not, struggling or something like that. So it always creates that kind of a little bit of a conflict there, a little dichotomy between the father and son or father daughter. So I can imagine being in your shoes there. Now, you mentioned your one son helping out. I know you're very popular on social media. I think you've been called the most popular or social media savvy astronaut there is. What was was that from your son generating that? What got you interested in social media early, doing all this?
Well, I watched how NASA executed the Apollo program. And the Soviets kept everything they did secret and only revealed something when it had already finished in a sort of a sanitized version of it. And NASA just said, this is way too important to not tell everybody. And they just broadcast everything. And it was hugely influential in so many lives all around the world. Millions of kids saw opportunity differently because of the example and the role models that NASA presented at the time. And so I think I just internalized that. But my philosophy on social media is no matter what age you are, if you're trying to do better at it, ask someone half your age. If you're 40, ask a 20-year-old, 30, ask a 15-year-old, 10, 20, ask a 10-year-old. And so I asked my kids before my third space flight, we got together at Christmas time, and they said, man, you need a social media manager. You need a publicist. NASA's doing a terrible job. And fortunately, our middle son, Evan, had just finished his MBA and was looking for work and was available for the 6 months of that flight. And he really dug into it and did a marvelous job of letting people know what I was up to. And a huge amount of innovative work and sort of seeing it through a different light. And NASA does well, Canadian Space Agency does well, but sometimes you just got to ask somebody younger and really motivated. And I've done lots of stuff myself, of course, but Evan was huge. And now he has his own whole documentary series on YouTube called Rare Earth. And he's currently filming down in the Azores right now. Has a huge following of his own. So he was super helpful to us, but also learned a lot and is very successful in his own right.
Incredible stuff. Yeah, that's one of the blessings of social media with all the junk and garbage that is on there. It's one of the coolest things is to have an opportunity to see what you guys do. It's so special. And today, with everything going on with space now, it's so exciting. My middle son is so just encapsulated.
How old's your middle son?
He is 13.
13.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He's 14. I have a 15, 14, 10, and 7. So I don't want him to knock me there. I got to give him his rightful due. But yeah, he's 14. He loves it. And when I told him I was interviewing you, he was like, he couldn't. I got your book. I already gave it to him to start reading.
Oh, thanks.
He just he loves all the things space. I think a lot of kids do. So it's awesome that you're very present on there and very transparent with what's going on. And that being said, what the game has changed here, going to Mars, we have the Space Force. There's so many different opportunities that are available now. What advice do you have for the parent out there that has the kid that's interested in getting involved, astronaut, space, something of that nature?
Well, I think number one is if you're going to ever take a job that is far from good medical care, which obviously space flight is going to be for a long time, you need a healthy body. And it can provide motivation for that 13-year-old to say, hey, if NASA's ever going to pick you, then you need to have a strong and healthy body. So, think about what you're eating, think about what you put in your body, and think about how much exercise you're going to get. You don't have to be a fanatic, but think about the long term of the health of your body. So to me, that's a good thing to draw from it. The second is, as you say, spaceships are complicated, and going to Mars and settling on the moon and all the other things. It's an extremely technical world. You're going to need to understand it, to contribute to it. So plan on being a student multiple times in your life. Learn complicated things. Challenge yourself. Don't just go to college to do what you already know how to do. Go to college to teach yourself a skill that only really patient instructors and a different habit pattern can teach you. So plan on being a complex technical student. And then the third thing, I think, that I would really counsel parents or kids themselves, and maybe your 13-year-old, I don't know if he's read my astronaut's guide to life on Earth. That's what it really is. Might be a good age, just some useful ideas. But the third thing is learn how to make decisions and stick with them. And you can start doing that at 10. I did, and it can start really small, like this month. It's just October. Right up until Halloween, Every single day, I'm going to do 100 push-ups every day, or I'm going to learn 5 words of Japanese every day. I can learn 5 words of Japanese or whatever, but resolve to do something different, to make a decision about yourself, and then stick with it for a measurable amount of time, because then you can see how you have molded who you are. By the end of October, you are a different person. You could do the opposite. So I'm going to eat 20 Big Macs every day from now to the end of October. By Halloween, you wouldn't fit in your costume. You'd be a whole different guy. So to me, those 3 things, use the idea of the motivation of being a space explorer to change your personal habits on fitness, on education, and on the ability to make and stick with decisions. And you'll be setting yourself up for no matter where you go in life.
Yeah, wow, incredible stuff, Chris. I really appreciate you speaking on that. And one thing, like I said to you earlier, I bring a lot of military dads on, a lot of Navy SEALs, a lot of guys that have deployed combat. And I can only imagine what that is like to have to leave your family to go on a combat deployment, let alone to leave your family to go into outer space. I can only imagine what that mental preparation must be like. Take me through that if you could. What is that like for you, knowing that you're, obviously going to be involved in a dangerous mission? You're leaving the planet and saying goodbye to your family. Walk me through those kind of emotions when you're getting ready to go on a space mission.
Yeah, and I flew in space with a Navy SEAL. I don't know if you've spoken to him, Chris Cassidy. Amazing guy. So wonderfully capable and still thoughtful and multi-skilled. But getting ready for a space flight, obviously it affects you as the astronaut enormously. And what it really boils down to is giving yourself the position to be able to ignore more and more things so that you can truly just focus on doing this extremely complicated thing and doing it to the best of your ability. You can no longer be focusing on taxes and remembering your grandma's birthday and cutting the grass and everything. There's just, if you don't execute this space flight properly, people are going to die, and the whole space program, is always beholden to its next launch. So what that means, it's a big ask of your family and friends. If you're going to absolve yourself of your normal paternal duties or husbandly duties, then that means the load is going to have to get on your wife and your kids, or if you're a woman, your husband and your kids and your family. And so that's a big ask. So talking about it and setting it up, and recognize this is dangerous. So don't just cross your fingers, but have a plan. Don't just go, I hope this goes okay, but instead say, I may well die next Thursday. So let's have a plan. And I actually had my wife come in to one of the sims that we run, the big management sims, where I died on orbit, because it's a measurable probability. How is everybody going to react? How will the technical people and the medical people and the public relations people, and how many minutes will it be before the Houston Chronicle is sitting on my lawn, or how soon will it break on social media, and how should my wife get ready for it, and what sort of life insurance? And I'm a Canadian, so how much longer will she live in the States? Where will she move back to in Canada? Let's just go through all that. It's probably not going to happen. But by going through it and thinking about it and having a plan, it's actually calming. It's like, okay, this probably won't happen, but if it does, I'll be sad, I'll grieve, but we've got a plan that's going to work. So I don't need to just irrationally fear it. Get enough insurance, have a plan, and recognize that this is an important enough thing in one member of this family's lives that everyone is now willing to be part of dealing with the risk and the potential aftermath. And to me, that was a really critical part. Otherwise, it's always going to be like this little unspoken eroding cancer that's going to be behind everything. And I think it's much healthier to confront it and have a practical plan for the possible eventualities of what may happen through each family member's life choices.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, Chris, for all parents. I mean, maybe to not that extent, but like something life insurance, getting that taken care of does bring a certain sense of security to you. I do agree with you there on that, and something that I think all dads should definitely do. So, very well said there. And I wanted to jump into now the Apollo murders here. What decided you to jump into the fictional thriller here, writing fictional thrillers, and what could you tell the listeners about it? And what's been the feedback so far from the book?
The Apollo murders is alternative history thriller fiction set in the spring of '73. And I mean, James Cameron said, a mission that never really happened, or did it? I couldn't put it down. And Andy Weir loved it, and gosh, Frederick Forsyth, who wrote The Day of the Jackal, he loved this book, and Publishers Weekly, and there's an article in the New York Times about it. So other people who should know better are loving this book. But the book is almost entirely true. It's got over half the characters are real people. The secret Soviet space station that had a machine gun mounted on the outside, that really existed. And the secret rover that was driving around on the moon, Lunokhod, that was really there. And Kissinger's in the book, and Nixon and Haldeman and a bunch of people, and Gene Kranz, and so it was tremendous fun. I love research, and I love discovering new stuff. And so weaving my plot of Apollo 18 as it went through all these things, including cosmonauts and some pretty amazing twists of plot. I'm really happy with it. And I've learned a huge amount writing this book, but already working on the next book in the series, just because it's already in 12 languages and being published all around the world, and it's just a brand new book. So I'm really delighted at this stage of life to discover that I can write thriller fiction in a way that people really get the story. And it really allowed me, if you're talking about Navy SEALs, what's it really like day to day? How do you talk to your buddies when things are going great, or when you're off duty, or when you're truly, in the combat situation? What are the quick, stupid thoughts that are flashing through your head? How does it feel and sound? In my previous books, you just don't get into that true human nitty gritty of it. But by writing thriller fiction, suddenly everybody can have a superhuman type of reaction to all of the crazy stuff that's going on. And so it gave me great freedom to let people know what it's really like to be an astronaut. So I think people are going to like it. I just did a thing on NPR. And so anyway, I'm really happy with how this book came out. And I've also discovered that, as another dad activity, I really love writing at this stage of life too. So that's been another fun piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, so cool. And who better to write this book than you? And it says right here, many of these people are real. Much of this actually happened right in the beginning here, right off the jump. So
yeah.
A link is going to be in the description of this podcast episode for my listeners. Get over there, check it out, and buy a copy. Let me bring it right back into you as a dad here for a second here. What type of disciplinarian were you, Chris, as a dad with the kids growing up? And is that different than the discipline style that you grew up with?
Yeah, my dad was raised by his grandfather, one of those things where the mom wasn't at a proper stage of life. And so he was raised by his maternal grandfather, and his brother was raised by the paternal grandfather. So that guy that raised my dad was born in like 1880 in the Victorian era. So my dad was born in 34, was raised with Victorian values, like Queen Victorian values. So that was quite an interesting childhood for me. Very male dominated. Women were in a different role than men, if you think back to Victorian rules, and just, how the culture is reflected through the way that we behave ourselves. And I was raised on a farm with 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My wife was raised by a single mom with no brothers or sisters in an apartment. So the 2 of us had a wildly different view on what normal was at home and what discipline should be like, and how do you conduct your life on a daily basis. And since we had 3 kids, we were sort of, mathematically somewhere in the middle of 1 versus 5. And so my wife and I talked about it a lot, and her immediate, natural, learned way to deal with things was obviously different than the example that I'd been raised with. And so we constantly discussed it and, batted heads about it and tried to come up with the right middle ground. And our philosophy basically was, we need to be consistent. Our kids need to have a good sense of right and wrong. They need to have bounds. When they cross those bounds, there has to be a fitting, punishment for it. But not any sort of abusive level, just a recognition that decisions and actions have consequences. And you're going to learn that at home, so that then when you go out into the real world, hopefully you'll have already internalized those things. But I think, apart from me turning into this famous astronaut guy partway through their childhood, I think otherwise they got a pretty good value system from us and a pretty good understanding of normal. But a really important part of being a parent, you know it as well as I do, and everybody listening, is everybody is imperfect. Each of us knows it within ourselves, but recognize the fact that your spouse isn't perfect and your kids aren't perfect. So allow them to be human beings. Allow them to be who they are. Recognize that just because you think something is really important right now is not necessarily the black and white eternal definition of something. And they may see the world more clearly on this subject than you do. So you got to be the rule maker. You have to be the dad. You have to not just be their friend, but at the same time, don't just be unilateral and authoritarian about everything. Try and draw the middle ground where you can. And, we blew it all the time, but at the same time, all our kids are in late 30s now and conducting their own lives and have pursued different professions. And we have a granddaughter. So I think we've done okay.
Yeah, really good stuff. Yeah, my wife and I made those mistakes early on as well, where we finally came to the point where if we have different parenting philosophies and discipline, but don't correct one another in front of the kids, we wait now and we let it go, and then later on say, "Hey, I wouldn't have done that. I would have done this." So that's one thing that we did have gotten a little bit better at as we're still learning the game ourselves here. So very cool, good stuff. Last thing I want to hit you with here, Chris. I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about to be father who's out there listening?
Number one is you aren't the one who's pregnant. Have some respect. This is a huge ask of your spouse. I mean, the changes to her body, it's like she's suddenly taking a whole new suite of drugs for 9 months, because of all the body's preparation for motherhood. And so the behaviors and it's an enormous physical change, and then the physical burden and then the incredible torturous process by which birth happens. We're evolved to have as big and a big-headed and a mature baby as possible, right at the limit of the human anatomy, the female anatomy. So have some respect for all that. Be as supportive as you can. Recognize that it's not you going through this. You're in a supporting role to pregnancy and childbirth. Be there if you possibly can. And then it's not going to suddenly, be back to normal when the child is born. It's a whole new normal. Your house has now been invaded by an alien, and the two of you have to figure this whole new game out. Be consultative, be consistent in front of the kids. But as you say, the two of you work hard at improving your skills as a parenthood. I remember seeing a stand-up comic once who said, you need a license to drive, you need a license to fish, but anybody can have children, and so, take it with at least some level of responsibility, and recognize that you can get better at being a dad every single day. And even when you're my age, at this stage of life, and your kids are, fully functioning adults in the world, you're still their dad. You still have a role to play. It's evolved over time, but I'm lucky enough that my dad's still alive at 86. And we still have a father-son relationship. And I think you're in this for the long term. Work really hard to try and be the best dad that you can. And if you blow it today, apologize. Try and learn from the stupid stuff that you did and see if maybe you can get it slightly better tomorrow.
Yeah, well, very well said. I love the message. This has been an honor for me. I got to say, Chris Hadfield, you're a first-class father all the way. And thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Fatherhood.
Alec, thank you very much. I wish you and your wife and your 4 kids all the very best. And thanks for having me on. And I'm glad you enjoyed the Apollo murders. It's been a lot of fun to write. And I hope a lot of people learn a little more about what just might have been in the space program by having a chance to read it also.
Yeah, good stuff. Link is in the bio of today's podcast episode.